Good morning, everybody. Hopefully people can hear and see me clearly. My name is Ben Walsh. I'm the Deputy Challenge Director for Transforming Foundation Industries, part of UKRI. And I'm here to talk to you today and introduce a great lineup that we've got this morning in this presentation. This is the sixth in a series of webinars around net zero towards a sustainable future. And this one is focused on sustainable materials. So the format of the day is that I have 5 great speakers who are coming to talk to you for about 10 minutes each. And then following that, we've got a Q&A session at the end of the last person talking. So I will be making comments myself, but I really am looking for the audience to provide us comments, and please don't put them in the chat, put them in the questions and answer, and we will highlight the best and we will debate at length. So my job really is to introduce the panel and provide a little bit of content and context to start the day. So the reason we're here and we're talking around materials is that I am representing Transforming Foundation Industries Challenge, which is focused on 6 material sectors: the glass, ceramics, metals, paper, chemical and cement sectors, which are about half of the UK industrial emissions. So clearly an important sector, but clearly an important concern around their environmental impact. More widely, the material sector across the globe accounts for about 1/3 of all environmental carbon emissions, which makes it an extremely important sector if we're going to reach a carbon neutral world. And indeed, this is highlighted by the Committee for Climate Change, and one of the reasons why we're here talking on this is how do we solve some of these challenges. And the Committee for Climate Change's most recent report talks about resource and energy efficiency as being the largest contributor to reducing the impact of industrial emissions up to 2030. More than hydrogen, more than carbon capture and storage, which will come in much later. But in the short to medium term, the talk is all around resource and energy efficiency, which is ultimately what my challenge is focused on doing. So the challenge is looking at innovation on resource and energy efficiency, focusing on everything from academic research, which is trying to pull through good technologies to industrial settings, developing pilot scale facilities for scaling up, promising technologies on to an industrial setting, and also looking at innovation, supporting very small, very fast moving companies with equity investment. Also key to highlight that we are trying to de-risk innovation through supporting companies through collaborative research and innovation. With our most recent competition currently open, looking to really start to move the needle on the innovation piece by providing up to £2.5 million in grant to some quite substantial projects. The key word there was around collaboration, though. And I think that is really important to say that I think that as part of our process around innovation, we have noted that the collaborative piece is important, particularly in this very large, very difficult space we're in around materials and sustainability. And really it's around trying to shift the mindsets and encourage companies to work together and sectors, cross-sector working, to try to solve some of these challenges. And really that's kind of where we are as a challenge. We're focused on looking to deliver some of these projects and show the benefit of this cross-sector working, particularly as we start to move to a point where what we're currently focused on are the material sectors themselves, looking much more broadly across the whole supply chain and how we encourage the end users really to start to demand significant changes throughout the material supply chain. So that's me, and that's really what I'm here to stay and talk around. And now to introduce the panelists, I'll give an overview of their bios, and then we'll kick off with our first speaker. So first up, who's going to talk is Emma Wilcox. So she's the Chief Executive of Society for the Environment. She has a PhD in physical metallurgy and began her career at MPL, National Physical Laboratory. Her career has spanned knowledge transfer, training, skills, and across various disciplines. And having established the Energy and Efficiency Industrial Partnership and playing a critical role in creating 2 skills academies, she became the Chief Executive of Society for the Environment. She's a chartered environmentalist and a fellow of the IOM3, as well as a chartered fellow of the Chartered Management Institute and a graduate of the Goldman Sachs 10K Small Business Program. Following on from Emma will be Cheryl Anderson. So Cheryl is a head of customer engagement at Tata Steel and has more than 17 years experience working internationally in the steel industry. In 2013, she established the customer engagement function within Tata Steel to pioneer company-wide approaches to understanding customer needs, including open innovation. She's a materials science degree and a PhD in steel technology from Swansea University, and is committed to engaging young people in careers in materials, and has spoken to school events at the Royal Institution for Women in Science and Engineering, and works in roles developing resource support and materials science teaching. Next up will be Mark Jolly, Professor Mark Jolly, who is a Director of Manufacturing at Cranfield University. He's managed over £17.5 million in research projects since 1999 and has over 350 publications to his name. Recently, he took the directorship for Transforming Foundation Industries Research and Innovation Hub, Transfire, and is also the co-director of the Circular Economy Network Plus and Transport Systems, and co-director of the EPSRC Doctoral Training Centre in Sustainable Materials and Manufacturing. Mark is a recipient of the 2019 John Campbell Gold Medal for continual advancement in sustainable manufacturing and promotion of excellence in casting technologies. Following Mark will be Aston Fuller. Aston's the General Manager of Glass Futures, which is a global centre of excellence for glass research and development, innovation and training. Aston's spending most of his time establishing a £60 million facility based in St Helens focused on glass, and which is due to open in 2023. Prior to Glass Futures, Aston spent 8 years at Ardagh Glass, gaining experience in furnish technology before working for British Glass and Glass Technology Services. Over the past few years, Aston has developed a passion for driving change in sustainable engineering, manufacturing, and helped open knowledge for the glass industry to a younger generation of engineers. And finally, will be Lee Wright, who works for the glass manufacturer Encirc as a talent specialist. He is responsible for strategic planning of skills and talent, with a key focus on diversity, early careers, and community engagement. With over 10 years' experience, Lee is passionate about the future skills required to support net zero and the journey businesses must take to future-proof talent and skills pipeline that support diversity, youth, and community engagement. So without further ado, I will pass over to Emma.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. So hopefully the technology plays this morning. Hopefully that's okay. I've been asked to speak about what does a sustainable material really look like and how do we know? And we've got some fabulous speakers coming up who are going to really focus on some of the technical detail. So I thought I would approach this from a more strategic point of view and really dig into actually what do we mean by sustainability in the context of materials. So I'm sure, as you all know, sustainability means our own needs don't compromise the ability of future generations to meet their own. I don't think that's a controversial statement, and that's the basis that I'm going to use. So I'll just move on to the next slide. Wonderful. I love it when the technology actually works. So first of all, what do we mean by sustainability? Now, up until more recent times, when we talked about sustainability, predominantly people were talking about economic sustainability. And if you reflect back to last year, when we talked about furlough and when we talked about grants for organisations, predominantly the word sustainability there was used in the economic context. Are these organisations sustainable for the future? Are these jobs sustainable for the future? Now, I would have loved the Chancellor to actually have meant the full element of sustainability when he said that, but actually what he meant was, are they economically sustainable for the future? So are they able to meet the financial requirements, keep systems intact, keep the economic system intact, and actually deliver a return to organisations is what he meant. More increasingly, in more recent times, we've really also focused on environmental sustainability. And if I was to take a poll of people in in my kind of local community and ask them, what do I mean by sustainability? I'd like to bet that most of them nowadays would talk about environmental issues. They'd talk about climate change, and they would probably talk about things like single-use plastics or air quality or the natural resources around them. And people are becoming very much more aware of the issues around environmental sustainability in the community they live in, which is wonderful. But there's a third really important part of sustainability as well, which is the social elements, where we need to consider the human rights and basic necessities attributed to people around the world. So although we may be thinking about a really good environmental solution that's actually economically sustainable, we also need to think about the social elements and make sure people are protected from discrimination as well. So that's the three elements, and all three elements need to be in balance and need to be considered for us to really focus on sustainability. So what does that mean for materials as well? Oops. So what does that mean for materials as well? So in the materials context, materials can be produced with the required volumes without using non-renewable sources in a way that's going to deplete them, and the state and the equilibrium of the environment and key natural resources are protected. Now, often when we think a material is sustainable, we just think about that material because we can gain lots of access to it. But actually, we do need to think about all those other environmental impacts as well. And again, awareness is becoming ever greater on single-use plastics, on the environment, on biodiversity as well, and all of those issues as well. So that's what we really mean by environmental sustainability from a materials point of view. I'll come to the economic one next. So again, in terms of the economic sustainability, we need to understand the costs, we need to understand how that fits into a system. Does that protect the economic systems around as well, and secure sources of livelihood? And sometimes those things can be in conflict with each other. For sustainable materials, we need to address both of those. And then, as I said before, sustainability has a third part, social sustainability. So it's about materials that support universal human rights and basic rights and keep families and communities healthy and secure, which for me is where supply chains are really, really important, particularly when materials are being sourced from overseas on different places. Do we really know where those materials are coming from? Do we really know the impact on those local communities? Lots of talk about electric cars and electrifying. Do we really understand where all of those materials going into all of those batteries are going to come from and the impact on those people? So that social element mustn't be forgotten between the environmental and the economic sustainability. And all of these three parts must be in balance for us to genuinely have a sustainable material. So really importantly, how do we know? So you heard in the introduction that I started my career post-education at the National Physical Laboratory. So you would expect that measurement would be really important to me, and of course it is. And we all know that expression that we get what we measure. So we need to focus on what really matters. We need to measure it. And it really importantly, we need to report on it publicly. We need to be accountable for our actions, and we need to challenge others to be accountable on their actions. There's lots and lots of employers who are doing wonderful work. There is lots of employers who are, dare I say, greenwashing and hiding behind different things. And as consumers and individuals, we need to challenge that. So we need to get people to report publicly and really understand that. So we absolutely must focus on what matters. I'm sure everybody on here knows that the environment is part of it's part of a system, and we need to use tools such as life cycle analysis and the circular economy to think about the full life of a product or the full life of a material, not just the individual part that we want it for now. Now, if I went back and I said this to my grandparents, they'd think I was crackers, because of course you don't throw something away, you keep it and you reuse it and you repurpose it, and probably have it for many years. It's only in more recent times we've become a much more throwaway society, and we need to relearn those lessons that we knew about all materials are valuable, and we need to make sure that we are using them, minimizing waste, reducing that impact, and really thinking about the materials that we have. And as I said, tools like life cycle analysis and circular economy are really valuable to that. We need to take a systems approach. The environment is a system, and I'm sure you all know many examples where we focused on one element of protecting the environment only to cause an impact in another. Diesel engines is a really great example of focusing on reducing carbon but actually causing a problem with air quality. So we really need to think about all of the elements of sustainability, and as I said before, not just the environmental and the economic, that social piece as well, and the supply chains. Where are these materials coming from? Do we really understand that the impact that they're having? And we must really think about that very, very carefully. And then of course, how do we know? Innovation is wonderful in coming up with the technologies that we need to use and all of the solutions. We mustn't let perfect be the enemy of the good. We've got lots of fabulous solutions out there already, and the innovation has to come in the implementation of those and really making sure we drive those through. There's a piece in the news this morning about grants from government to kind of put in heat pumps for people. There's so many technologies, but we really need to use innovative approaches to really make sure that we are implementing them into our products, our services, and our lives as well. Of course, keep looking for those alternatives and really, really focus on doing better. But ultimately, how do we know? Well, of course, we focus on what matters and we measure it. So finally, just before I wrap up, so I started at the beginning by saying that sustainability has 3 parts. And of course, I've said that we need to focus on what matters and we need to measure it. Now, if we just focus on the environment or the economic or indeed the social, we are missing actually looking at sustainable materials in a whole. And the Sustainable Development Goals do provide us with a really good framework of looking at all of the elements of sustainability, making sure we're focusing on what's important and measuring it. So I'd really encourage any work that you're doing in looking at sustainable materials to really use the Sustainable Development Goal framework as an ability to do that. And as I said at the beginning, sustainability is meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. And Sustainable Development Goals provides a really strong framework for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. And now can I ask Cheryl to give a presentation, please?
Yes, good morning, Ben. Thanks. I'll just share my screen here. Okay, I'm hoping everyone can see that. So good morning, Ben. Thank you for the introduction earlier on. As Ben mentioned, I'm Head of Customer Engagement at Tata Steel, and I look after customer experience and open innovation for the company. I've been doing this for about the last 8 years. So first, a quick introduction to Tata Steel. So we're part of Tata Group, which was founded in 1868 in India and now operates in more than 100 countries and has total revenues of more than 120 billion US dollars. And one fact not everyone knows is that Tata Sons is 66% owned by philanthropic trusts, and 170 million were invested in community projects last year around the world. And it's a really important part of the philosophy of Tata Group. Now, from a UK perspective, you might have heard of Tata Motors, who own Jaguar Land Rover, or Tata Chemicals, that have a plant in Cheshire. Of course, Tata Steel, which is where I work. In the UK, Tata Steel make around 4 million tonnes of steel and have 8,000 employees. And people are often familiar with our integrated steelworks, which is situated in South Wales, originally where I first started my career. But we have actually 9 manufacturing sites around the UK. So we're making things like packaging materials in Llanelli, organic coated products in Shotton, which is where I'm based right now in North Wales, tubes and pipes in Hartlepool and Corby, and tailor welded blanks in the Midlands. And we also have 2 research facilities in Warwick and Swansea in partnership with the universities there. So that tells you something about our operations and products, but my perspective on our business is always to try and look through the eyes of our customers. Now, we serve customers in the most demanding markets, including automotive, construction, engineering, packaging. And when I think about sustainable materials, which is obviously the overall topic of this session, as well as thinking about our company and the materials we make, I'm always thinking about how what we do supports our customers in meeting their goals. So to be clear, for example, for our customers, I mean the automotive companies that make the cars we drive, as well as the companies that provide parts in their supply chain. In construction, everyone from architects designing buildings through to the manufacturers of building products such as wall panels and roof systems. In packaging, the companies that make food and beverage cans that we're used to seeing on our supermarket shelves, as well as the brand owners that make the products that go into them. And in engineering, manufacturers of excavating or farming equipment could be our customers. And then there's a wide range of companies that produce other products that we'd be familiar with as consumers, such as radiators in our homes, white goods in our kitchens, and even our coins. So when I think about the steel industry and materials, I think about all the things made from steel that are around us every day, as well as our own operations. Okay. So moving to the theme of sustainability now. So sustainability is absolutely at the heart of our strategy in Tata Steel, and we've strived to be among the most carbon efficient steel producers in the world. Now, steel itself as a material has a central role to play in terms of sustainability and decarbonisation. It's going to be needed for all the infrastructure that we need to generate and distribute renewable energy, for next generation electric vehicles and energy efficient buildings. And from our customers' perspective, there are a number of different factors to consider when we think about sustainability. And we've been recently conducting our own research in this area. My team's been working on that. And we heard about a range of things, such as the importance of understanding, of course, we'll be developing our own operations, reducing emissions and production waste, the use of recycled materials and the ease of recycling from different stages through the supply chain. The development of new materials that can, for example, reduce product weight for our customers or facilitate modular design to assist with end-of-life reuse, or responsible sourcing of input materials. So to take some examples of how we're helping to address these customer needs, first, we want to help our customers understand the individual impact of specific steel products so they can build that into their own assessments of their products. So environmental product declarations, EPDs, are designed to help us do that. And in the last 5 years, we've produced over 60 externally verified EPDs for our product range. And on the topic of responsible sourcing, we've achieved certification to the Responsible Sourcing Standard BES 6001, which now covers all our product ranges. On materials, we've developed materials that help our customers to design their products and set processes differently. So one example is Protact, a laminated steel innovation for packaging applications, which means that now there can be no emission of volatile organic compounds or VOCs during can making, our customers' process, also lowering energy and water requirements. And importantly, we have engineers that work closely with customer markets to help with material selection at an early stage of design. To help build sustainability into all our new products, we developed an assessment tool that takes into account a range of factors, such as climate change, water usage, emissions, and recycling. And we received recognition from that from global steel trade organization World Steel in 2019. And we've since shared the tool with our customers, and they're also looking at the same kind of methodologies. We've also been recognized for our work looking at zero carbon logistics, a sustainability framework focused on our outbound deliveries from our manufacturing sites. And since the launch in May last year, 25 active projects have led to over 9,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions reduction. And again, that's in partnership with our customers and other important supply chain partners. And finally, another topic to mention is data and the critical role it plays in sustainable materials. The steel industry has developed a common barcode system, for example, which has enabled us to provide product data to our customers. And its first use is in tracking material quality, but now the foundations are in place, there's potential for other information to be passed through the supply chain, making it more efficient and therefore more sustainable. And moving from using data to optimize our own processes to using it to help our customers to optimize theirs is likely to be a strong theme in coming years. So you can see we have a real focus on making sure that our developments support our customers' sustainability goals. But of course, although we're making progress, there's still much more to do. And there are some challenges as we strive to reach our sustainability goals and continue to support our customers. So firstly, new technologies and infrastructure are needed, and we need to be able to scale developments quickly. And this will be in manufacturing and energy, but also things like digital frameworks that will help us and our customers with product traceability, supporting that reuse and recycling that I mentioned earlier. Skills development itself is an important area. We'll need new skills to go along with new technologies, and we need to continue to show the exciting careers that are here in industry to attract people in. Boosting demand for low CO2 products is also an important part of the future picture, and government's role as a public procurer is vital, along with the wider role setting out policy environment for industry to be able to continue to compete. And many of these challenges, as mentioned right at the start, will need cross-industry partnership. At UKRI support innovation and partnerships through things like competitions and awards. I was at the brilliant launch event last week for the latest competition and mentioned these are great opportunities to put together some really exciting projects, but one challenge can still be finding the right partners. So any initiatives that help those of us seeking solutions find those of us solving challenges are always really welcome. So just to finally mention something about the topic of partnership further, I'd like to say something about how we're collaborating to address some of these challenges. So in Tata Steel, we've got a really strong history of working closely with universities and other research organisations. So one example is with Swansea University on the Engineering Doctorate Centre. Established by EPSRC, this doctoral programme enables research engineers to work on industry-led challenges with the aim that graduates move on to work in senior roles in industry. So I remember personally the thrill of working on a project directly in industry that early in my career, and value not only the research opportunity I got, but also the wider skills I was able to develop by working directly with industry. And we need more of these opportunities going forwards. Other examples are Sustain, which is a 7-year, 35 million UK steel sector research programme, bringing together steel companies, universities, research organisations and trade bodies, with the aim to transform the steel sector into a carbon neutral, zero waste sector. And the South Wales Industrial Cluster, or SWIC, where we're founder members, a cross-sector partnership, including industry, utilities, and power generation businesses committed to creating a net zero carbon economy in Wales. And finally, we're always looking for new partnerships, and Tata Steel has had an open innovation programme for 8 years that I'm involved in. We started by using external platforms to promote technology challenges and invite people to contact us. And this led on to the additional development of our own site, where our door is always open for people to get in touch with any idea or innovation that they think could be of interest. And this has led to some really exciting projects in recent years, including the SMEs. So to summarise and wrap up, as well as looking at the transformation of our own operations in industry, we also have a clear focus on supporting our customers in reaching their sustainability goals. There are challenges. One key to overcoming them is finding and supporting the right partnerships. UKRI have an important role here, as does Open Innovation, and together with our research and industry partners, I'm confident that we can take on the challenge ahead. Thanks very much. Back to you, Ben.
Thank you, Cheryl. And now can I request that Mark comes and gives a presentation, please?
Hopefully you can see my screen. So good morning, everybody. I'm Mark Jolly, and I'm the director of the new Transfire Hub, which is the Transforming the Foundation Industries Research and Innovation Hub funded by UKRI. And I'm going to talk a little bit about resource efficiency and the transition to using less through the Transfire Hub. So we've talked about the foundation industries, but what are the foundation industries? They're defined as the chemicals, cement, ceramics, glass, metal and paper industries. And I saw something in the question and answer about textiles. And of course, a lot of the textiles we use, if they're not natural textiles, come through from the chemicals sector. So we cover some textiles in that respect and some polymers through the chemical sector. So these industries produce something like 75% of all the materials in our economy and are associated with about 10% of the UK CO2 emissions, with a value of about 52 billion per year. The funding for the Transfire Hub comes from UKRI, as I said, and it's from the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund originally, which is no longer with us, unfortunately. And the whole project, including matched funding, is of the value of about £10 million. We started on the 1st of July this year, but were officially launched on the 6th of October for those of some of you may have gone to it. Our diverse consortium is currently from more than 75 organisations, and it includes our investigators and partners and shows a great depth and breadth. It's made up from academia, industry and trade associations and others such as PEIs, such as the Institute of Materials, Minerals and Mining, and other government bodies. There are 12 research institutions involving 20 investigators, and we have companies and trade associations involved in each of the foundation industry material sectors, and so covering all of the 6 that I've previously mentioned. And we have investigators and partners whose expertise and business is cross-sectoral, so not focused on sector, but are in things like energy and circular economy, in AI, in data and software, in management and operations, and equipment supply, and social sciences, and that includes environmental impact, and recycling, and we have end users. We also have some international relationships with companies within the consortium amongst the COIs and the project partners to enable benchmarking internationally and sense checking. So the Transfire journey, the vision of the programme, is the creation of a proactive and multidisciplinary research and practice-driven research and innovation hub that optimises the flows of all resources within and between the foundation industries. And I emphasise between. And this moves the industries away from the image of the black smokestack polluting manufacturers to industries that use fewer resources in terms of energy, water, and raw materials, as well as improving competitiveness, working with the communities, assisting the UK in achieving the greenhouse gas emissions net zero targets, and developing a cross-sectoral wide ED&I strategy. We've started by creating 3 work streams to initiate the work, but we will be flexible in direction depending on the outcomes and the external factors that may influence the research as we go through the 3 years. So the first work stream is called Transferring Best Practice. So what we'll be doing is investigating and identifying similar processes, things like comminution or granulation or drying, cooling, heat exchange, and materials transportation and handling. These are things that are used in every sector. And we'll use tools such as the Gentani process, which looks at the minimum resource needed to carry out a process. We'll be benchmarking and identifying best practices, looking at resource efficiencies in terms of materials, energy, and water, and the environmental impacts such as dust, emissions, etc., and look at these across sectors and share that information horizontally. We'll be doing modelling and building digital twins of processes to enable scenario simulation. So looking at things like material substitution and waste stream and supply chain modelling. Workstream 2 is called Where There's Muck, There's Brass, or sometimes we call it that Where There's Muck, There's Gold. And these will focus on looking at the waste streams and looking at raw materials for other sectors with little or no further processing. We'll be looking at investigating upcycling of waste, so adding more value by the potential of further processing, but without increasing the carbon footprint of the materials that are produced. We'll be potentially looking at new materials and alternative byproducts, which are less harmful or of lower carbon impact. And then potentially new and novel materials and processes that enable cheaper and lower energy and lower carbon products in the end. And finally, in this work stream, we'll be heavily investigating any industrial symbioses that are new, looking at sustainable and circular business models and governance arrangements that are necessary in such cases to move away from waste completely. And lastly, work stream 3, working with communities, we'll be looking at things like low-grade energy capture from warm air and water, and identify the potential for potentially co-located businesses, things like using this low-grade energy in district heating or market gardening or other manufacturing processes which don't require the same level of energy as the primary ones. We'll investigate these potentials with regard to societal, environmental, technical, business and governance perspectives. So post-Transfire, what will we have created? We will have created a core cross-sectoral team of diverse researchers and industrial stakeholders. We will have created a body of fundamental research and a suite of research directions. We will have a number of quick wins to ensure that the benefits of the hub have been demonstrated, and we'll also have a set of governance mechanisms to ensure diversity in all its guises will be sustained across the foundation industries and the collaborations. With the TFI Network Plus, we'll have created a cross-sectoral capability, allowing us to work together across the foundation industries for the next 15 to 20 years, targeting net zero 2050 and moving towards reducing our use of resources and eliminating waste using the creativity that results from inclusivity and diversity of the research team and the partnerships and collaborations. Thank you very much. You can join us if you're interested on transfire@cranfield.ac.uk, and there are some upcoming events around the TFI Network Plus on energy efficiency on the 3rd of November 2021. These are sponsored and supported by the KTN, and on the 11th to the 13th of May 2022, we will have a Foundation Industries Forum, which will be a joint production with the TFI Network Plus. And there you'll see some of the results from the feasibility studies and the case studies that we will be running through both the Network Plus and Transfire itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And now I'd like to invite Aston to come and give his presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Ben, and thank you for the previous speakers. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, fantastic. Right, yeah, so my name's Aston Fuller. I'm the General Manager at Glass Futures, and it's nice to be invited to speak here today. I wanted to speak a little bit about the role of research and technology organisations within collaborations, give a little bit of experience as to what we've seen over the course of the past couple of years with Glass Futures, and just to share some ideas on what we can do to potentially break down the barriers for collaboration and what those barriers might actually be. I do like to just highlight initially the actual definition of collaboration, which when I first looked this up quite shocked me, to be honest, but it's interesting to think that there is a, even within the definition in and of itself, a challenge highlighted, which is that collaborate means two things. One is to work jointly on an activity or a project, and the other thing also is to cooperate traitorously with an enemy. And I think actually this is quite ironic, because as we go through this conversation about collaboration and changing society and the way that we use materials around us, what we have to recognize is that there are numbers of players throughout the supply chain, not just in single supply chains, but across the many different supply chains. And there are numbers of competitors within those supply chains, yet we need to be able to move things forward. So we need to think about how we can work together effectively where we may have people that we are competing with. And that's a key part of the thing I'd like to highlight today. What I would like to just, building on that foundation industry aspect that Mark very succinctly covered all those different areas, I think just to go into one in a little bit more depth with glass, is that, you know, it really is an enabler for many different aspects of society around us, in the same way that steel was discussed before earlier as well. The reality is glass is absolutely everywhere. It's in the wind turbine blades that give us renewable energy. It's in the fiber optics that are laid across the Atlantic Ocean. It's within the vaccine, pharmaceutical vials that are being used, you know, all around the world, very prominently, defense and aerospace. These are the sectors that aren't always obvious, that aren't always around people, but the ones that are all very obvious and around people is, you know, in the buildings that we build, in all of our glazing and our architecture, but then also in the packaging and the food around us. So it really is ubiquitous, and often not always thought about overall. So let's talk a little bit about collaboration. I think at first, if we look at the vertical supply chain, so in any industry, I think what's really important to highlight is that there are a number of key players that are important to how we actually affect change. That is the academic and research organisations, and Glass Futures as a not-for-profit RTO straddles the line here between academia and industry. And we ultimately have the industry and its suppliers, its widest supply chain, and then ultimately the end users. What's important to understand is the optic from which people occupy in a supply chain as to who their end users and customers are. The public-facing brands of our multinational organisations are facing consumers on the shelves, in the places that everyone walks around in public. But there's a huge amount of industry whose customers are those big brands that are customer-facing. And ultimately, I think what's important to understand is that there is a number of different drivers, but also challenges for different people at different parts in the supply chain. And my belief is that to effectively actually unlock the collaborative power of all of these different groups together, it's important to understand what those drivers and those pressing and those touch points are for each individual organization. So one of the things that we always talk to people about, and for those that don't know the glass industry or understand the way that it operates, the way that it manufactures glass, it really is pivotal to understand what are the barriers to the rate of change for the glass industry. As an example, all of the glazing and architectural glass that's produced in the UK comes from 3 furnaces. Those furnaces melt circa 800 tonnes per day. So just with 3 key assets in the country, all of our glazing and architecture that's used within the UK is provided. So if one of those furnaces goes down, we lose 33% of UK output for glazing and architecture. Now, it's really important to understand that we are part of a global supply chain. So, it would be remiss of me to mention that we do import and export glasses as well. But it gives people an understanding of the scale and the nucleation of heavy industry. And to that end, these furnaces that are producing 800 tonnes per day typically run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for 20 years at a time. And that hopefully provides some insight as to the risk-averse nature of a capital asset that's designed to last for 20 years. What it also highlights is that the rate of change that's needed for those assets is very, very fast in a time period where within 20 years, the targets that we're looking at for sustainability and decarbonisation, net zero, etc., are very much very close. But the reality is they are unable to take risks at a scale that will allow them to take the change. They have a huge amount of pressure from the end users in the supply chain. There is a huge amount of technology solutions and possible research outcomes that may well affect the change that we need. But industry really does struggle to deal with the fact that they are commercial entities that cannot afford to take very large risks that could potentially lose, an asset that may well take a business out of operation. And those pressures, I think, are important to understand. That's why Glass Futures exists, in particular for the glass industry. But as was discussed before by Mark, the ability for us to take our learnings and apply them in other sectors is very much an important part of the mindset and the interactions we have with other people. And we are building a pilot line to be able to bring a unique capability to this research space. And this is supported by a number of key multinational manufacturers around the world, because the reality is they are unable to carry out this research on their own assets. And it is also very expensive research for single companies to carry out on their own. So what we've seen is the development of people that are looking at pre-competitive research in what is a neutral space that allows them to take the learnings and apply it across the rest of their industry. What we're starting to see as well is that this is not just about the technology, this is about the skills. I know Lee's going to talk about that shortly. And by providing a unique collaboration space, we believe this is the key requirement to unlock the ability to change at the rate that we require. So just to give a couple of case studies and examples, and just to talk a little bit about where do I think the challenges, but also the opportunities lie. And there's a number of people that we're collaborating with as an organization. And just to give an example, there are people that occupy a similar space in their supply chains, and it's very easy to see where they compete in the marketplace. If I take Diageo, who sell a lot of alcoholic beverages around the world, brands like Johnny Walker, Gordon, Smirnoff, and you take Heineken, who are a massive beer producer. For those that aren't aware, Diageo also own Guinness. So ultimately they are competitors in the marketplace. However, they both buy glass through the supply chain. They don't manufacture glass primarily. And as such, they are trying to understand how they can support the supply chain to decarbonise, so the products that they buy have less carbon within them. Now, what's interesting is that if you start thinking about where they have common ground with other people, and if I use a couple of examples, so earlier on, we spoke about the fact that Tata are serving to the automotive industry, own Jaguar Land Rover. Well, actually, they don't produce automotive screens, but they buy them from a manufacturer. If you take a company like Wilcox, who sell windows on the face of it, but actually they sell light. That is their business model. They are buying products from the glass supply chain, but they are not manufacturing them. So they have something in common with the likes of Diageo, the likes of Jaguar Land Rover, where they are all trying to encourage a supply chain to change. And I believe this is where we need to think about, where do we have competitors, but where do we also have common ground with people that aren't always in our supply chain? And to that end, I'm very supportive of the work that Transfire is doing, because my personal belief and what we're starting to see from the collaborations that we're beginning is that we need to begin to look further afield than just the vertical typical supply chain of academic, industry, supplier, and then end user. We also need to look at parallel supply chains where end users or industry partners have things in common and they can actually collaborate and work together. I believe that by finding those collaborations, we can move away from competitive spaces and encourage people to have very open conversations about how do we actually affect change. And that is ultimately the role of the RTOs, and that is the role of Glass Futures within this and similar supply chains, is to help link those collaborations and to provide a safe space where people can carry out really cutting edge work and deploy things at a scale that allows us to roll these out and actually affect the change that we need in the time period that we need it. So it's been a pleasure to talk about this today. Like I said, if you've got any questions, collaboration ideas or concepts, or you just want to reach out and build a better network, please get in touch with us. And I look forward to the panel session later on. So back to you, Ben.
Right, thank you very much, Aston. And finally, I would like to invite Lee to come and give his presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Some really interesting presentations from the speakers today, so I'm hoping to kind of follow that well. So my name is Lee Wright, and I am a talent specialist working at Encirc in Elton. So my talk, my presentation is more around the people element of achieving what's needed for sustainable materials. So looking at the key topics, some challenges and opportunities when looking at sustainable materials, and how people and talent can broker the success for what we're trying to achieve. I think it's quite obvious that it's clear that we have some very strong synergies in our thought processes and what we've been presenting today, and these themes can absolutely be presented can be applied to people and skills. So what I'm going to take you through is a more simple presentation. The first thing I want to talk about is around collaboration. Clearly, it's been mentioned in every presentation this morning, and likewise, huge advocate and believer that collaboration can be that broker for really good success. And we can't do this alone. So when we're looking for skills, for talent, for future talent, and we're strategizing that people and workforce requirement, we have to work in collaboration with lots of other agencies. So UKRI, for example, Glass Futures is a perfect example. And Transfire, yet again, just another example of what we could do to broker that collaboration. In terms of what that might look like, it could be anything from working with schools, community groups and other employers in trying to work together collectively as one in understanding what that future need is, what that future skill need is, and how can we work together to source, develop, train, cross-pollinate those type of skills for what we need in the future, even down to the collaborative design of qualifications and education programs through universities, and lobbying kind of the government around through the education and funding systems. The next thing I kind of want to talk about is around the systemic approach, opportunities and challenges, I suppose, with this. One of the things which is important from my world, from a talent perspective, is whether those systems, policies, processes actually enable the change that needs to be made. So we've talked very openly about supply chains, customers, consumers, but for me, it's making sure that the systems and processes are aligned, and it certainly doesn't limit us in terms of what we're wanting to achieve. In terms of the supply chain, if we have a look at innovations further down the supply chain, that can absolutely provide innovation and trailblaze what we need to do from a manufacturing perspective and onwards. And I suppose one of the things which is really important is to understand that the lack of change or innovation in one area, in terms of that system, whether it's policy, process, can ultimately affect or limit the change and the outcome further on down that particular system. And it's trying to understand what can we do collectively to ensure that everything contributes effectively as an enabler. It can even talk about having challenges funding with colleges and having the right technology in universities and colleges. I've been recently working with a number of universities and colleges on a funding bid to make sure that we have sort of locally the right kit in the schools, colleges and universities that our future engineers and graduates can practice, quite simply. So that's really, really important to ensure that we do that. The next thing, linking quite nicely, is education. So we know as an industry, but also as a professional, that we have quite an oversupply of level 2 kind of qualifications, and there is current movement in the kind of education and training world to really ramp up and promote the level 3 to level 5 qualifications, which just gives us that higher level of skill and knowledge, and allows us to diversify what opportunities we have around apprenticeships and graduates. The other thing is looking at grassroots. So when we're trying to attract people to the industry, it starts right at the beginning, excuse me, with grassroots. So engaging with primary schools, engaging with youth groups to really understand and promote the sector of kind of foundation industries and glass to them as a career. Moving forward into secondary school, ensuring that the curriculum is embedded wherever possible with STEM subjects, and the topics and the subjects in the STEM subjects really do promote the future skills that we will require to ensure we're performing sustainably as a business. Again, moving on to university, making sure that the undergraduate programs and the postgraduate programs really do start to benefit us as the end user, as employers, but the students really getting that exposure and the right level of skill when it comes to renewable energy, sustainable engineering. And we need to be part of that discussion with universities in the development of their curriculums to make sure that it's fit for purpose and we are ahead of the game wherever possible. And finally, once they've gone through the grassroots, secondary, university, when they enter the workplace, we have certainly in Encirc and the glass industry as a general, we have an aging workforce, but very talented and very skilled. So it's ensuring that we don't forget those people who are already in the business, already in the sector, and what do we do from an existing workforce perspective around multi-skilling and getting them ready for change, getting them ready to pick up and be energized by the new technology and the new skills which will be happening and already are kind of happening. And then finally, it's around diversity. So diversity, again, is very, very important to me. And for me, diversity in any form is healthy. and it brings real depth and to industry and business. We need to ensure that those who are unrepresented in the industry know about the sector and can train also in the sector and apply for roles in the sector. Most people only know the careers that they know about in terms of their immediate social circles or families. So we've got a huge job to do to make sure that we promote the right careers. And ultimately that starts at the beginning. People need to know about the sector to be able to make those choices around their career and education. People need to be able to access the right education, whether that be the right degrees, the right A-levels, the right GCSEs, the right adult education programs that will ultimately pipeline through into our business. They also need to be able to apply for, so making sure that the jobs which we are going to recruit for currently or in the future are promoted well. The campaigns are suitable, they're diverse and they're inclusive, and we really start to actively promote a wide career opportunity. And then ultimately, when they get into the workplace, they can be successful. So making sure that internally, any organisations have the supportive policies and processes in place around diversity, and we are inclusive wherever possible. I hope that's kind of provided you an idea of some of the skills, some of the areas of concern, areas of opportunity, and also the synergies between what the other speakers have spoken today from more of a technical perspective. Again, I'm very happy and welcome any questions in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lee. If I could invite, if Lee, you stop sharing your screen, I'd invite all the panelists to come off, to come on video and come off mute. And Lee as well. Brilliant. Fantastic. So thank you very much. I think I would agree that those were excellent and on-point talks. And unbelievably, we finished with 1 minute to spare, which is I don't know whether it's lockdown, people getting more efficient with their talking or what, but certainly from a normal conference perspective, you wouldn't expect that. So thank you all for keeping to time. We've got a good half an hour now, which is really good to kind of have a conversation, kind of bounce, hopefully try to bounce some ideas off each other. I recognise it's a bit still on Zoom. And I've got loads of questions that have come through as well. So thank you very much for the audience members for providing those. So I thought I would run through kind of a question each, and then we'll kind of open it to the floor and we'll see where we get to. So I thought, Emma, your talk was really interesting, actually, and particularly, you talk around 3 ways of sustainability. Triple bottom line, I think in old money it used to be called, that kind of language. Is how do we kind of affect transformation within companies and policy making to think beyond? I guess we're moving to the point where we're thinking particularly on sustainability from an environmental and obviously an economic perspective. But how do we kind of embed the 3 parts of sustainability within kind of policy making and kind of companies more broadly?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. Very difficult. And we know that often companies are driven by profit and by shareholders, and that's the way our economic model is set up. So I mean, really big picture, we have to look at how we measure success as a country. And if we continually just focus on GDP and growth, then back to you're going to get what you measure, aren't you? So I think first of all we need to shift at the government level how we actually focus on things, but then let's come right down to the bottom level. I think a lot of this is customer demand and awareness, and if customers don't buy something because they're not happy with it, then companies are not going to sell it, are they? Because again, they wouldn't do it. And of course there's a balance in that around affordability. But if everybody actually knew what was going into the product that they've just bought, if people knew what was going on with the cobalt, for example, in batteries in their mobile phones. Would they be so willing to go and buy a new one every time it comes out? So I think there's some of that as well. But it's difficult and it's a journey, and I don't think anybody's got all of the answers, but we all have to try and move on this journey together.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And actually, like seamless segue there into Cheryl talking around customer demand and kind of knowing what's in their products. And this is a bit of an unfair question, Cheryl, so to throw out, but like engaging the customer is obviously hugely important from a sustainability. But a lot of the examples you talked around were sustainability, but they're around performance increases as well. How open is the conversation starting to get around sustainability, where potentially there isn't a natural, it's not a decrease in performance, but there isn't a natural increase in performance, but it might have a cost implication if you're looking at more sustainable products. How are those conversations going with some of your end customers?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, obviously, in the end, we always want the products to perform and support our customers in achieving what they're trying to do. So I mentioned the example of lightweighting. I mean, that's something I worked on right at the start. That end stock I was talking about was all around that, around introducing, higher strength steels. I was working on weldability and trying to make sure those products, both, yes, offered performance improvements, but also, reduced vehicle weight and offered improvements there too. So of course, we're always looking for that in materials to have that opportunity to find both. But of course, there's broader conversations going on around all aspects of sustainability, and perhaps to just link to what Emma was saying, I mentioned around responsible sourcing being a topic that we're also getting asked about. And that's why we're looking at certification in that area, to have that external verification that people could be confident around. So I think all of those subjects around sustainability are important to our customers. And yes, of course, we always want to be able to link it to materials as well. So that's probably the best way I can answer that.
In terms of verification, how are you finding, because obviously there's so many different ways to cut the same onion in terms of sustainability, is the EPD kind of your route of choice in terms of trying to show the sustainable credentials of your products?
It's definitely an important one, yes. A few years ago, we actually took quite an unusual step and we became an operator ourselves. We got verified so that we could produce EPDs, because we recognised we've got a really wide range of products. I talked about all the different market sectors we're serving, and all of our different customers want to understand the impacts of the materials that they're buying for their market sectors. So yes, that is one important way, but there are some limitations around EPD sometimes, and we need to look at the different modules within EPD that are being used as people publish those. But there's also more specific questions. So we get every week new questions more specific to customers' individual applications, and I've got colleagues who work to try and make sure we're really responsive in answering those, because the faster we can answer those questions for our customers, the quicker they can build those impacts into their products as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And kind of talking again, kind of the more cross-sector piece actually, and coming into market. Actually, I think probably one of the first question was how difficult was it, or how did you find trying to build such a large consortium for a piece of work? Was it pushing an open door, or was it around how you messaged it? What was the process you had to go through to get those people in the room to start to agree, essentially, to be part of the project?
Well,
sorry, Cheryl, for Mark.
Sorry, I think it was for me. Sorry, Cheryl. Essentially, it was having a very open door and using the networks and the links that we have within the consortium. But there was a willingness to want to work together, I must say. And I think if I had written, or if we had written the same proposal maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there would not have been quite such willingness to work across sectors. I mean, I know that for a fact, that people were not recognising that. Why would the steel industry talk to the ceramics industry? Why would the cement industry want to talk to the paper industry? But it's regarded now as something that's really important. And the important thing about TransFi is that we're not looking necessarily on the very in-depth technologies within each process. So we know we're not going to use the same process to make steel as we do to make paper. But there are ancillary processes which still have and contain a huge amount of energy and resources. And some of the practices that we're going to be looking at are about those well, all of the stuff we're going to be looking at is going to be cross-sectoral. So we are not looking at individual sectors. This is cross-sectoral work. it is a requirement that we have to look at this cross-sectionally. So there'll be practices in the steel industry, there'll be practices in the glass industry, there'll be practices in the ceramics industry that will be useful, and lessons will be learned and can be transferred across the industries. One of the important things that's come out of this, I think, in our first few meetings, our first few technical working groups, is how many of the companies within the sectors are actually suppliers into the other sectors. And we've already heard that from Glass Futures. You can hear the same stories from some of the ceramics companies. You can hear that from the steel companies. You know, the steel companies will be supplying the companies that using the cement, and so the cement supply chain, they're in construction. The glass industry is supplying into the construction industry. So this is why, as Aston was saying, we have to have the full supply chain. We need the end users involved, and of course we have end users involved in our program as well. I mean, Diageo, for a start, for example, is in both the Glass Futures and Transfine. And there are a number of other companies that I notice. You know, Siemens, for example, is also in both programs, and this is because they're interested in sustainability. Sustainability really has come to the top of the agenda in many manufacturing companies, and that's throughout the supply chain. That's right from the beginning to the end of the supply chain.
Fantastic, Mark. And actually, I think then that leads really nicely onto kind of Aston's talk. You did start to touch on this around is breaking down some of those commercial barriers, and I guess a natural distrust of sharing problems, I guess, and the potential solutions is how are you going around trying to kind of corral the glass industry around some of these, which are common, tangible but quite complex problems that they probably can't solve in their own right.
Thanks for the question. I'm an engineer, so with great pain at times talking to lawyers is one of the answers. Yeah, I think the reality is there's an importance in understanding, especially when talking of industry, is to not skirt over the commerciality facts. You know, it's very easy to talk about what everyone wants to achieve, but the reality is very rightly pointed out, Emma, they're commercial businesses, and they will not make investments that ultimately put them out of business. And I think you have to recognize that as a starting point. And I think you need to make sure that they are aware that you are aware of that, because often I believe that approaching companies and talking about ideas and concepts without that commerciality as part of the conversation can often essentially lose the trust at the very beginning of that conversation. I think trust and understanding their businesses is really, really important. You know, if you don't understand the process that you're trying to help assist with or to change, then you can struggle. Now, you don't need to know everything in depth. And to your point, Mark, you know, understanding what those ancillary systems look like, I think is important. I think that's why there's a huge amount of collaboration opportunity between the foundation industries, because actually from a boots on the ground perspective, the processes, the way that they operationally run, the economic drivers are very similar. I think the key part once you've done that is to actually sit and map out where are their ideas and concepts and where do they want to work, and to actually bring ideas to them that are pre-screened, have a good economic case, and that have got a good possibility of being implemented in a short period of time. And I think there is an irony with industry in that, you know, they install huge capital assets that have very long lifespans, cost a lot of money, that are very risk averse, yet the ROI and the implementation period for projects like this that they want is very, very small. And I know one of the approaches that that companies like Siemens have is to look at putting together series of works that have a mixture of short, medium, and long-term paybacks. So by working on things that have a short-term impact that can give them either good publicity or a small gain in the short period of time that allows them to begin making that process happen. If you can combine that with some of these, you know, longer-term bets or longer-term investments that maybe don't have a great ROI, and they see it as a suite of changes that they can be part of, I think that's when you can start unlocking real conversations about real change being able to happen. And I think they have to be realistic, they have to be time bound, they have to be measurable, and, you know, they have to work economically. And that's where I know one of the questions is about the role of government. and the role of people within this as a process, sometimes these things need intervention. And as a society, if we want these things to happen in the model that we have to learn how to and where to intervene.
So that brings quite nicely, I think, then to Lee, actually, around intervention and intervening, really, particularly around skills and diversity. We all know there's a diversity issue within these sectors. Ignoring even virtually all the protected groups, just about age diversity is a dramatic and important problem. But taken as a whole, what do you think would be the single biggest change that what's the single biggest thing that we could do, either as a government or as industry or as a society, that would encourage a more diverse workforce within the material sector?
Yeah, really good question. I think my personal opinion would be to really understand and work with our communities a lot closer. We employ, as an industry, as a sector, many people locally. So it's how can we really start to break down the barriers and create more opportunities for the people within our communities across a wide kind of wide spectrum. So one of the things, Ben, is we're looking at an initiative called HOCUM, which basically stands for Helping Our Communities Achieve More. It's an acronym, and we have a curriculum that we really want to go out to our communities with. And it's got key messages to not only support Encirc and what we're trying to achieve, but also the glass industry and our communities. So they're kind of topics on promoting diversity. So that'll be some of our colleagues going into schools. So female engineers, for example, going and speaking to young people in schools to give them a role model positively. We're partnering with organisations such as the Girls Network, providing females positive female role models. We'll also kind of go into schools, community groups around and talk around sustainability. So providing them with skills and also knowledge about how they can, as a family or as young people, really contribute towards what we're trying to achieve. And also create opportunities around work experience placements and support initiatives to support recruitment in for ex-offenders, veterans, and also kind of back to work returners. So maybe ones who've been on maternity or taking some time off to look after their young family, and look just to see how we can really start to pull and attract talent from everywhere, rather than your usual channels that you would necessarily kind of go and recruit the source from. If we can start to be kind of firm ourselves as part of that community, educate, increase awareness, and really start to build those bridges, then that is one of the things which every organisation can do to kind of diversify the workforce.
Thank you. I think we could spend an hour talking on diversity.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had lots of questions. It's quite hard doing this, 3 screens at once. So the one thing I think that maybe to pass out to panelists in sort of last 10-ish minutes, 8 minutes is we'll start with talking around what role does government have to play in promoting and enabling sustainable growth in a strong green procurement policies. For example, mandating the use of locally produced steel or specific levels of recycled content in national infrastructure projects, such as we've got HS2, but I suspect it could be anything from hospitals to schools, really, in terms of it. So what is government's role? How does government enable sustainable materials growth within the UK? I think it's probably a good place to start. So happy for people just to jump in.
I'll have a quick go and then I'll step back. Of course, government has to play a role, and yes, of course, that those kind of procurement projects where government can do that and demonstrate how to do it, and at the same time look at local recruitment and all of those diversity things. But often some of the challenges come in the kind of the more the practical government legislation, so building regulations or kind of finance regulations or other things that put a barrier in. So I think it's more than that leading the way. It's actually looking at some of those regulations around things like low carbon concrete, or the grades of steel that can be used, or wood, or what other materials. Some of that planning piece, I think, is critical in this as well.
I think one of the challenges is beyond government, though, is the societal side with materials themselves, the acceptance of materials as they are. I mean, one of the interesting things I was talking about within the chemicals sector, for example, was the recycling of plastic bottles, and the plastic bottles that are recycled don't look as the same as the bottles that are pristine virgin material, and yet they do exactly the same job. So there's a sort of societal acceptance of recycled materials that we accept in certain aspects of society. So we accept secondhand cars, we accept secondhand houses, we're starting to move towards perhaps a bit more of secondhand clothes. The textile industry is actually moving quite a way towards that, and there is a circular economy hub that's looking at these aspects. But there are certain bits that we seem not to want to accept secondhand materials because they don't look the same. And I think this is a question of the materials community, and that will also involve government in somehow educating society into a way of accepting recycled materials that are fit for purpose, but don't necessarily look exactly the same as the material that they had from a pristine sort of first virgin material. And again, I think that also comes back to Emma's comment about specifications. Sometimes the specifications which have been set in certain circumstances are unrealistic. Quality is about fitness for purpose. It's not about having the highest specification necessary. And that's where, as a society and as engineers, we've somehow gone wrong. We've missed this in some way. And I think we need to readdress many of these. These are many things that we have to cover, because we will not hit net zero targets just by reducing the carbon footprint of our manufacturing processes. We will have to reduce the amount of material we'll be using. And some people are saying we will have to reduce our materials usage by 50%. That's a massive challenge. It's a massive challenge for government. It's a massive challenge for industry, because industry will then have to change its business model. And looking at the business models, it means how do we change the business model so that industry can still make a profit or make some business, be economic? And I think we have to start thinking about custodians of material, ownership of material, leasing of material throughout the whole of its lifetime. These are incredibly challenging problems, and I don't have a solution, and we certainly won't have a solution within 3 years, but we have to move industries and start to get that conversation going with industries, not just the engineers, but the business part of engineers and the business part of government and the treasury. And if we don't move that, we will not hit net zero targets 2050. We really will not.
Aston?
Yeah, I'll come in. I think you make a really good point, Mark, and the colour of recycled content containers, I think, is a really, really good example. I think when you talk about systems change, Emma, the really important part of this system that is probably often overlooked, and given the ED&I around age, it's probably one of the key drivers for it, is that the influence of the consumers, but also social media and the world that we now live in. The rate of change of the world is alarming. And I think the reality is, to change these systems, there are levers that the government can pull, and there are interventions that the government has to do. But the reality is, actually, if we want to affect rapid systemic change, we need to learn how to use the tools that are available to society that have got us to where we are. Now, ironic, given my age, is that I'm not a massive social media right? When you might look and make your perceptions around age. But the reality is that this is one of the really important tools that we need to be aware of, that the likes of all of the customer facing brands are using to make their decisions. And I agree, Mark, we've gone wrong in some places as engineers and as scientists, which is that we don't always assess the impact that our decisions might have on the decision-making process of consumers.
Absolutely.
We can legislate, but we also need to learn to work within the system that we have, because we cannot rip the system down and rebuild it. And I think that's government definitely have a role to play, but it is a role as part of a much wider set of actors. And they're the people we need to engage with.
And of course, the finance models that the government currently looks at, the GDP, is all about growth. It's all about growing the pie that we all have. And I think that's something that somehow, as a society and as engineers and as materials people, we have to have a voice in. That maybe government, this is not the right way forward. We have to change something.
I think the biggest risk we have to Cheryl's business in particular is that, if we legislate ineffectively, we may well not change society, but we may well lose all of those jobs and that skills base and that industry within the country. And I think that's the real risk.
So I couldn't agree with you more. If you think about the kind of change of view around plastic bottles and plastic bags, an awful lot of that went back to a David Attenborough clip that went viral of a bird eating a plastic bag. And that was completely through social media. So yeah, I completely agree with you. So
Cheryl, Lee, Cheryl, do you want to comment on that? Because essentially what we're suggesting is we might need half the amount of steel that we need right now. So how that is, I guess, a genuine thing to face.
Yeah, well, it's a challenge, but it's also, I guess, an opportunity to look differently at how we think about materials and think about the products that are made from materials ultimately. And I think there was someone mentioned earlier about reuse. I mentioned that myself. So I think designing for reuse is something we're looking at with, for example, people in the construction industry. There's some really innovative things going on there. But things like the supply chains themselves right now are not built to handle reuse of materials as much as they are built to deal with purchasing new materials. So I think there's a whole load of work that we can do and we can support and work on collaboratively around that area. And that will help because then there'll be a better understanding, not only of the materials themselves, the fact that they're recycled, renewed, and getting to standard definitions around some of those things, but also has some confidence in the materials that come back through. And I think data working with materials is going to be an important part of having confidence in those materials in the long term, for our customers. So when they know they're using, a new material that's partly recycled, that they understand what they're getting. So I think there's some things around that standardization of definitions as well that can help in terms of people making those choices later on.
And in terms of then, to follow up from Lee's perspective, is that change is coming, and how do we future-proof is a strong word. How do we ensure that we have the right skill set within the current workforce and future workforce, and particularly, I guess, from a leadership perspective?
That's it. I think what the question, you mentioned the word enabler in your question, and I think the government really need to look at how the funding streams can support the institutions, the academic universities, in supporting, firstly, the universities and colleges and schools in supplying with the equipment, the kind of teacher training around STEM and kind of topics such as sustainable materials. So the teachers are skilled enough to kind of disseminate that information down to their students, which is really, really important. But also that those people who may not necessarily go to university or get the opportunity to go to university also get the right funding, so they have equal opportunity to access the right education and opportunity as well. In terms of leadership, absolutely, the leadership population would be the leverage in that success, where leaders can support innovation and I'm thinking can support high performance, but also can also mentor and coach people coming through, and they can kind of transfer that tacit knowledge onto their workforce as they move onwards and upwards. So lots of money, please, from the government to support colleges and apprenticeships and all that wonderful stuff. And also, as you said, leadership to absolutely use that niche skill to lead others into the future, really.
Fantastic.
Lee, can I make a comment?
Please.
You haven't mentioned your wonderful network called Women with Bottle, and I really think you should mention how good that is. Yeah,
so Women in Manufacturing is the network. Women with Bottle was the promotional campaign which we did to really support and showcase some amazing women in industry who've achieved some incredible things. So Women in Manufacturing is a network which supports women within Encirc, and we've strongly signed a diversity charter which kind of commits us in blood almost to some really positive action towards supporting women around the recruitment process, where we've got a commitment to ensure mixed diversity panels, interview panels. We've ensured our crews are representative of the women within our workplace, and we have big ambitions around talent and succession to ensure that women are represented as true leaders in the business going forward. So thank you, Mark, for that,
Fantastic.
signpost. So thank you.
So my alarm's gone off, which tells me to ask for people to give kind of closing remarks. So I'll go around from regional order. So Emma, have you got some closing remarks before we finish?
Lots. I think I would just say, yes, it's a big challenge. We all recognise it's a big challenge, but we do have a lot of the answers already. And the focus on collaboration today, I think, is a really critical one.
Fantastic, thank you. And Cheryl?
Yeah, I mean, I think I also build on that point around collaboration, but I mean, materials are a great part of the solution of how we're going to take on some of the challenges in front of us. There's loads of positive stories on this call about how we can do that, to do that together here, to do that with other industries. So I think anything that can be done to support finding the right partners, all those things like the event last week, which helped to show the different capabilities that are out there already and helping to connect people. I think that's a really positive part of how we'll take things forward together.
And to Mark.
Yeah, collaboration, I think, is key. I think we have to think of the 50% that we have to somehow reduce by 2050. And as an example, I'd like you to look at the grey building behind me. Most people wouldn't have recognised that as a foundry. It has no chimney. It has no emissions. The cast iron that's cast in that foundry uses 50% of the energy that the average cast iron foundry uses within Europe, and all the waste energy goes to the local community for things like the greenhouse on the right-hand side or the district heating. And that has been done since 2012. This was built in 2012. This is being done already. We have to move our industry in the UK to be that sort of forward thinking.
Fantastic, and thank you. And Aston?
Yes, thank you. So building on the previous points, but I suppose just sort of flagging up where I think the challenges are, but on the same merit, where the solution will be found. I think, being fair, there's a huge amount of people working on this, and I think it's important to understand that it is a noisy space because there's so much going on. I think the reality is, collaborations are born of people relationships, and those people relationships are the things that I think will ultimately get this thing through. They take time, they take dedication, they take listening to the other party and understanding what the drivers are. So I think the key thing for me is that there is a huge amount of dedicated people that want to do this. The reality is we all have to learn how to reach out, open the door and spend time talking about it, because actions are really, really important, but we need to discuss them to actually make them happen. So this is a people problem, I think, as much as anything else.
Fantastic. And Lee, on the people problem.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with Aston on his kind of final words there. I think there's a collaboration is really a massive key theme, and I think we need to really work together to collectively tackle some of the challenges, but also similar to Aston's pitch as well. Look at the solutions. We've got the most amazing platform and opportunity now to do something really great, which can kind of spearhead and trailblaze into the future. I think if we can work together, that will be really positive outcome.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'll just do just the final 30 seconds just to say thank you all to my panel. That was excellent. And just to pick up on Aston's comment of noisy space, got to remember that 2 years ago, net zero didn't exist in the UK language. And 12 months ago, resource efficiency wasn't considered particularly important as part of kind of how we get to net zero. So although it is noisy space now, I've been sat in the intellectual cold for 20 years of my career talking around resource efficiency, and feel suddenly being invited into the warmth has been an interesting journey. Finally, just to say thank you to the audience for sticking with us. I've had a really good session, and this is the 6th of the 7th. So the 7th one is on sustainable energy, which will be on the 9th of November. from 11 to 12:30. So it's as good as this, then you'll be in for a treat then. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ben, and thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.